I've never really thought of myself as the super active type. I'm not out here chasing marathons or anything like that. But I do like to run sometimes, just to stay in decent shape. My buddy Jay is the complete opposite. He's always been fit, always pushing me to go further, so whenever we hit the gym or go for a jog, he's the one setting the pace. Most nights we run pretty late, usually around my neighborhood. It felt safe enough. The streets are lit, the area's quiet, nothing really out of the ordinary. At least that's what I thought, until a night 2 months ago changed everything.
To picture this right, you've got to understand the layout. My neighborhood has this one main road, and off of it are smaller roads that split away but eventually curve back and meet the main one again. From there, the road stretches into a dirt path that leads into wide open farmland and big properties. Jay and I decided to push ourselves that night, so instead of sticking to our normal loop, we took a different route. Through the woods, out to one of those side roads, back to the main, and then all the way down the dirt path before circling home. It was meant to give us more distance, more challenge, and honestly, at the time, it felt like a great idea. But the thing about great ideas, sometimes they turn into the kind of night you never forget.
The run started out like any other, with Jay and me leaving my house, laughing about some dumb high school drama as our shoes hit the path. But then, out of nowhere, we heard footsteps behind us. At first, it didn't bother us. That trail was popular, and it wasn't unusual to see other joggers or people cutting across the neighborhood. But the longer we ran, the stranger it got. The steps never faded. They copied us. When we picked up speed, they got faster. When we slowed down, they slowed down too. It was like someone was locked onto us, shadowing every move. My chest tightened, and I could tell Jay felt the same because he kept glancing over his shoulder. By the time we reached the end of the path and stepped onto the bright streetlights of the main road, we spun around only to see nothing. No runner, no walker. Just the empty path stretching back into the dark. Jay and I locked eyes, both thinking the same thing. That wasn't normal. We kept going, turning onto the side road that connected back to the main street, then following it until it faded into the dirt path. At first, everything felt fine. Our pace was steady, and we were both in the zone, pushing further than usual. But once we hit that dirt path, the vibe shifted. There were no streetlights out here, just rows of tall trees on both sides, their branches closing in like a tunnel. The night air felt heavier, almost pressing against my chest. We pushed forward about a mile before finally agreeing to turn back. That's when it happened. I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A dark figure, fast and sudden, slipping into the trees on the left. My stomach dropped, the memory of those footsteps earlier slamming back into my mind. I told Jay what I saw, voice shaking, but he brushed it off, laughing nervously and saying I was tired and imagining things. For a second, I almost believed him, but deep down, I knew what I saw was real. We ran past the spot where I thought I'd seen the figure, trying to shake off the nerves. But right as we were about to reach the main road, a sound cut through the quiet. Rustling. Close. Maybe 20 feet behind us, coming from the trees. We whipped around and froze. There, in the middle of the dirt path, stood a figure. His back was to us, body still, wearing a black hoodie, torn khaki pants caked with dirt, and scuffed black shoes. My heart slammed so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Jay, trying to sound tough, shouted, "What the hell are you?" But his voice died mid-sentence. That's when the figure started laughing. A horrible, broken cackle that made my skin crawl. Every hair on my body stood on end. Then he turned toward us, the laughter cutting off instantly. What I saw next still chills me. The pale face, wide, unblinking eyes, and that glare, sharp and empty, like he was staring straight into my soul. Jay and I shared one last terrified glance before bolting, sprinting harder than we ever had in our lives. The awful laugh echoed behind us, chasing us down the road and pushing us to run even faster. By the time we made it to my house, I collapsed and threw up, then scrambled inside, locking every door and shutting the garage, heart still pounding as we tried to process what we'd just lived through. And from that night on, I swore I'd never go running in my neighborhood after dark again. If you're someone who likes to run at night, please stick to well-lit areas and never go alone. Having a friend with you can make all the difference, because sometimes it's not just the shadows you're running from, it's what might be hiding inside them.
Back when I was a junior in high school, running was everything to me. I wasn't the fastest on the team, but I had endurance, and I loved losing myself in the steady rhythm of my footsteps. That's why when a woman in a quiet rural neighborhood asked me to run her hyperactive puppy Izzy, it felt perfect. $10 a run, good training for me, and Izzy got the exercise she needed. Easy money, or at least that's what I thought. The area itself was strange, almost unsettling. Scattered old houses, a couple of abandoned farms, even a cemetery and the crumbling remains of some long-gone cult commune. My parents always told me not to run alone out there, but I figured, I'm fast, I can outrun trouble. That belief shattered one evening, just before dusk. The sun dipped low, turning the treetops orange, while long shadows stretched across the road, swallowing up the light. The only sounds were my breathing, Izzy's panting, and the dull thud of my sneakers on pavement. Every so often a bird flapped from the trees or a dog barked somewhere far off. But the deeper I ran, the quieter everything became, like the world itself was holding its breath.
About 2 miles in, we hit a lonely stretch of road, forest pressing in thick on both sides. That's when Izzy froze. Her ears shot up, her body stiff, and then came a low, shaky whimper that made my stomach tighten. I followed her gaze into the trees, at first seeing only swaying branches and shadows. Then I saw it. A man's face peeking between two trunks. He looked short, maybe mid-30s, with a hat pulled low, a heavy jacket that made no sense in the mild evening, and gloves that hid his hands. His eyes were fixed on me, wide, unblinking, and his stillness was unnatural, like he wasn't breathing at all. I tried to convince myself he was just a hiker, or maybe a hunter, but the way he stood there, half hidden, watching in silence, felt wrong. Like he didn't belong. Like he was something I should never have seen. I forced a polite nod, trying to act like nothing was wrong, then pushed forward into a jog. But my heart was pounding faster now, and it wasn't from the run. A few steps later, Izzy froze again, her body stiff, tail tucked so tight it brushed her belly. My stomach turned as I glanced back and nearly choked on my breath. The man had moved. He wasn't hidden anymore. He was standing right at the tree line, only a few feet from the road, still staring. His head tilted slightly, like he was studying me, daring me to react. That's when the truth hit me. He wanted me to notice. He wanted me to feel hunted. A cold wave slid down my spine as every part of me screamed to run, but I clenched my teeth, pretending calm, praying if I ignored him, he'd just fade back into the trees. I tried to keep my pace steady, forcing myself to look calm, but my eyes kept darting over my shoulder every few steps. For a moment, the woods looked empty, and I almost convinced myself he was gone. Then, in the corner of my vision, I caught movement. Fast. I snapped my head back and saw him sprinting toward me, a butcher cleaver flashing in his hand. My throat tightened, a scream stuck halfway out as raw terror ripped through me. Instinct took over. I bolted, every muscle firing, adrenaline hitting me like lightning. My lungs burned, gasps tearing out of me, Izzy stumbling to keep up as her leash yanked in my grip. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was that bone-deep certainty that if I slowed for even a second, I was dead. I risked a glance over my shoulder and nearly stumbled. He was still there, chasing hard, his face twisted with rage, mouth hanging open like he was growling. The cleaver flashed in the fading sunlight, and his movements didn't look human. Arms jerking, legs pumping too fast, almost broken, like his body wasn't built to run. That's when the horror sunk in. I could hear everything, my ragged breathing, Izzy's panicked gasps, the wind in the trees, but not his. No breath. Just the heavy pound of his boots closing in, that sickening silence crawling under my skin. I tore into the neighborhood, weaving through yards, cutting between houses, desperate to shake him. My legs burned, my chest was on fire, but I couldn't stop. Izzy stumbled beside me, leash jerking tight as I pulled her along. Finally, I ducked behind a shed, pressing myself against the rough wood, gasping so hard I thought my lungs would split. The night was silent again, except for the pounding in my ears. I forced myself to look, turning my head slowly toward the hill, and there he was, standing tall, the cleaver hanging loose in his hand, his chest rising and falling, as if he'd just run the same distance, but he wasn't charging anymore. He wasn't even moving. He just stood there, watching me with a blank face. No rage, no expression, just an empty stare that chilled me more than his chase ever could. We locked eyes for what felt like forever.
the world holding still, until headlights from a car cut across the road in the distance. The beams swept toward him, and without a word, without even looking back, he turned and walked calmly into the trees, swallowed by the darkness, as if he'd never been there at all. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever before finally forcing myself to move. Instead of the main road, I crept through backyards, taking the longest way possible to the woman's house, terrified he might still be out there. My hands trembled as I accepted the money, pretending everything was normal. I never told her, and I never told my parents, because deep down, I knew they'd never let me run alone again. I never found out who that man really was, whether he had ties to the old cult, was just some drifter, or something far worse. What I do know is the way he watched me that night will stay with me forever. From that day on, I never ran in that direction again, and I never let myself forget that sometimes danger is waiting right where you least expect it. This last story stretches across almost 7 years, and I'll do my best to keep it clear and to the point. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but it wasn't the kind of place you could just walk out and find people around. We were surrounded by nothing but empty fields and long, twisting country roads. If you didn't have a car, you weren't going anywhere. On the surface, it looked peaceful, even beautiful. Rolling hills, sunsets stretching forever. But underneath that beauty was isolation. The kind that seeps in when you realize just how far you are from anyone else. And during quarantine, that feeling of being trapped only grew worse. The first time I can clearly remember something being off was when I was about 9 years old. My little brother, who was 7, and I were walking our dogs toward the front of the street near the main road. We were just chatting, not really paying attention, when suddenly a voice cut through the air. "Hey, come here!" At the corner, a big white SUV was parked, and a man had his arm hanging out the window, motioning for us to walk over. I can still picture him, a tall white guy with curly blonde hair. My brother, too young to think twice, actually started moving toward him, but I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Even as a kid, I was paranoid, and I'd heard too many stories about children being tricked into cars and disappearing forever. I tugged us in the opposite direction toward home, but I kept glancing back at the SUV. The man watched us for a moment before turning his car around and driving off slowly. When we got home, I told my mom, but she brushed it off, saying he probably just needed directions. At the time, I let it go. But looking back now, I realize how close we might have come to something terrible. About a year later, on Halloween night in 2014, something else shook the neighborhood. A black sedan was creeping behind groups of trick-or-treaters, moving slow, almost stalking them. When one parent stepped up to confront it, the car suddenly lurched forward, trying to run them down before speeding off and disappearing into the dark. To make it worse, people noticed the license plates were gone, ripped off on purpose. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but the whole street was buzzing about it. Adults were on edge, and I got another long lecture about never talking to strangers. Fear was already high, since the murder of Hannah Graham had just happened nearby, and this only made the unease in our community worse. Fast forward 4 years to the summer of 2018. Some neighbors went on vacation and asked me to pet sit. 3 times a day I had to stop by, let their dog out, and lock up. Their house sat off the main road, and while I could cut through the woods to save time, the dense brush always made me uneasy, so I usually stuck to the street. One night I got caught up playing Call of Duty and forgot. By the time I remembered, it was past 10. The road was pitch black, the kind of dark where my flashlight only lit a few feet ahead. I hurried in, let the dog out, and was about to leave when something froze me. A black sedan was parked right by the driveway. I knew it hadn't been there when I arrived, and the family wasn't due back for days. There were no other houses around, no reason for anyone to be there. My gut screamed at me to stay inside, but the silence was crushing. After minutes of panic, I decided to risk the woods. Heart pounding, flashlight trembling, I cut through the trees until I finally stumbled back into my yard. Nothing followed me. For the rest of my time pet sitting, I always took the woods. I never saw that black car again, but the image of it waiting silently by the driveway still lingers in my mind. No, if it were just those past incidents, maybe I could brush them off as random creepy moments. But what happened recently is what truly terrifies me and makes me wonder if all of this could actually be connected. I run for my school's track team, and with quarantine shutting everything down, I've been training on my own, running every day on the country roads around my house. My street is short, so I usually head out to the main road and follow the smaller lanes that branch off. For months it was fine, peaceful even. I'd run for an hour, soaking in the scenery, the quiet fields, the winding curves. But about a month ago, things changed. I was jogging back home on the main road when I noticed something strange. A car seemed to be pacing me. I always run on the left side of the road, facing traffic, just in case a car comes up fast behind me on a blind curve. That day, a large white SUV was on the opposite side, moving almost exactly at my speed. What unsettled me most was how unusual it was to see any car out there. It's a quiet road, and usually people drive faster to get where they're going. But this one matched my pace. My pulse picked up, every step heavier as I tried to stay calm. To test it, I turned down a small side street that ended in a cul-de-sac. The SUV didn't follow, and for a moment I let myself breathe again. I circled back and ran home. But the thought that it had slowed down just for me still lingers in my head.
The next day proved it wasn't just in my head. I saw the SUV parked at the edge of a driveway, and as soon as I passed, it pulled out and crept along behind me. Just like before, it stayed with me for nearly a mile until I turned onto that same side street where it peeled off and disappeared. But it didn't stop there. This kept happening every day for 10 straight days. At first, I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe the driver had some routine that just happened to match mine. To test it, I switched things up and went out an hour later. That day, the road was clear. But the very next morning, there it was again, right behind me, like it had been waiting. My stomach twisted with dread each time, but I kept quiet. I knew if I told my parents, they'd never let me run again, and running was the only freedom I had. Besides, the SUV never tried to approach, never rolled down a window. It just followed. Still, the silence of it all was enough to unnerve me to my core.
On the 11th day, things escalated. I turned down the usual side street and saw a black sedan parked at the end. At first, I brushed it off. There were houses nearby, so maybe it belonged to a neighbor. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. Underneath the car, tucked on the far side, was the faint outline of a person, crouched low to stay hidden. My stomach dropped, every instant screaming that I was being set up. I bolted in the opposite direction, glancing back just to confirm they hadn't moved. But when I looked up the street, my blood ran cold. The white SUV, the same one that had been following me for days, was parked at the top. This time, not leaving, but waiting. Panic surged through me as I realized I was boxed in. With no better choice, I decided to risk it. I sprinted straight toward the SUV, heart pounding, praying my speed would save me. When I was just feet away, the door swung open and a man lunged out, trying to grab me. Adrenaline took over and I exploded into a full sprint, widening the gap fast. He couldn't keep up. Frustrated, he shouted after me, claiming he just wanted to talk. I didn't buy it for a second. Without looking back, I threw up 2 fingers. Yeah, that kind of gesture. And ran the last mile home, lungs burning, but alive.
I finally told my mom, and she called the police. But without a license plate, there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd investigate, but deep down, I knew nothing would come of it. These encounters have haunted me for weeks, and the more I piece them together, the more I realize these men have been circling our street for years, hunting for a child to take. My neighborhood has plenty of kids, and it chills me to think that someone less cautious might fall into their trap. I still wake up sweating from nightmares of the man who chased me, the tall figure with blonde curls, the same face I saw when I was just 9 years old, trying to lure me into his car.